Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody joining us today. Thanks so much for joining today's presentation on ransomware and our live demo. Our hosts today are going to be Christophe Bertrand. He is the VP of Product Marketing here at ArcServe. He's going to be covering a couple different topics for us. We'll do a brief history of ransomware, and then later in the presentation, he's going to come back on and do customer case studies and talk to us about best practices. And we have a second presenter with us today, the one and only Stacy Budd. He is a principal consultant on our pre-sales team, also our chief donut specialist. I heard that he may or may not have sampled a donut earlier today in preparation for this. He's going to be joining us in the middle of the presentation for a live demo showing how you could recover from a ransomware attack using ArcServe UDP. So with all that out of the way, as this is going through, we want to hear from you guys. So if you have a question, send it to us using the question section of your interface. We may answer one or two during the presentation, but we'll get to the majority of questions at the end. So please do send those to us. This recording, the session's being recorded, and I'll send an email out to everyone later this afternoon with a copy of that. So keep an eye out for that so you can watch again or share it if you'd like. And with all that out of the way, take it away, Christophe.
Thank you, Mary. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining our webcast. Before we get into more of the detailed questions around ransomware and how to recover from those type of situations, leveraging the ArcServe technology, just to give you a quick reminder about who we are. You may know the name ArcServe. We've been around for a long time, but actually we're a very new company in many ways. We've been independent since 2014. We have a great new technology that we launched in the same time frame called ArcServe UDP, Unified Data Protection, and you'll see a demo of it today in the context of ransomware type of scenarios. And we're a global company, so we have presence around the world, which gives us also the ability to gain a thorough understanding of backup and disaster recovery needs, and certainly keep our fingers on the pulse of what's going on with the various type of data corruption issues we see, and in many ways, virus infections, ransomware is just that. We have received numerous awards for our technology. Our solution, ArcServe UDP, is a unified data protection, backup, and recovery solution that is designed for virtual environments. We also do extremely well with physical environments, and we support many, many applications that you have in your IT infrastructure. And we've been recognized by many awards, and certainly are very proud of that. So with this in mind, I'd like to start talking a little bit about ransomware with some simple definitions that I think everybody's aware of. If you're joining this webcast, you feel that you may have a problem soon, or you have had a problem and you need to figure out how to get out of it. So ransomware, what is interesting about it fundamentally is that, as the name indicates, unfortunately, it's malware that's designed to make you pay money to recover access to your systems and data. This is essentially a very modern form of ransom. And what's interesting about it is that typically it gets into your environment through end users via email. So the tools you use to communicate, to do business with, to again communicate with your partners in the value chain end up becoming the vectors through which the infection spreads. Now, it's not new that somebody can get a virus through an email, but what's different here is that those cryptoviruses or Trojans are essentially going to create a situation where someone's going to knock on your door virtually and say, well, if you want your data back now or access your data, you got to pay me. So what it does for you essentially is the exact same thing as losing the system. So in practical terms, except of course for the extortion part of it, you don't have access to that data, right? In some cases, it may be such that you do lose the data, or you're never getting back access to it. So two options: you pay up, hopefully you get the decryption key and it works and you get your data back, Actually, I just got some interesting statistics I want to share with you about that. Or you can just ignore it and say, well, I don't care about my data, or I will have to restore it. So this is pretty much the situation with ransomware. So let's take a look at the next slide, where I cover some of the statistics that I literally picked up a couple of days ago in online. There was a poll of IT managers. So this is a UK survey, but I think it's very telling. It is it applies across the world. As I said, we're a global company. I can guarantee you that we hear the same stories around the world. So what's interesting here is that in the UK, the majority of businesses, 44%, that's almost the majority, have been infected in some form or another in the past couple of years. Okay, and that's 300 UK businesses. Given the size of the market, given the size of the economy, it's a pretty representative sample. It's actually very scary. That tells me that in North America, we're probably in the same type of levels, if not more. Certainly, there's been a lot of news recently about that. What's more interesting is how much money people wanted. So $722, obviously paid in bitcoins, which are impossible to trace. And some of the companies or organizations, because not all of them are actually private companies, some of them may be public type of organizations. 20% of organizations reported ransom demands of $1,300, close to $1,500. So quite a range here, from $700 to $1,500. So that's an interesting cost to know, and that's for just one incident. So typically an end user, through maybe lack of good IT education or not paying attention, will click on the document. Typically it's going to be one of those photos.zip, thinking it's coming from some friend or something, and then the virus starts spreading. It will infect the shares, it will infect everything that the computer has access to. And of course it will lock up the data. And there are multiple forms, as I mentioned earlier. It lock up the data in multiple different fashions, whether it's changing the extensions or doing funny stuff to your boot sequence. Regardless, once you lose access, you lose access. So what's very interesting here from a data protection standpoint. Now, this is obviously a virus infection where ransom is being asked from you. But look at that number, 33 hours on average fixing the issues, right? So this is a very important number to remember, because 33 hours here to fix the issue from the moment you've detected this problem to the moment you get the issue resolved is your recovery time objectives. And by the way, the good news is that for those who use backups and were able to recover, because they essentially refused to pay the ransom, 60% said they were able to retrieve data from backup files. So it's an interesting number too. 33 hours for fixing the issues, but in a sense, only 60% were able to retrieve data from backup files. It's a good start, but it's certainly not the results you want to get to. So let's talk about RPO and RTO on the next slide. Recovery point objective is really one of the measures you use in data protection, backup, and recovery. It's essentially how far behind are you when you recover your data. For example, if you've just done a snapshot of a server, production server with very important data to you, you really care about it. You've just done a snapshot 5 minutes ago. Your recovery point objective, if you were to lose that server, would be 5 minutes. Now, the recovery time objective, which is the other side of the equation, is how long it takes you to actually get that data back online, or that system and its data back online. There are multiple techniques that we can use. You'll see that when our friend Mr. Simpson demonstrates the solution. Many different ways that you can optimize your recovery time objectives and your recovery point objectives. There are some trade-offs, but those are very important. In the case of ransomware, it's very, very critical that you understand when you were infected, because obviously you want to go back to a point in time where data was good. So this is why RPO and RTO, as I said, really apply in very much the same way as you would handle any type of disaster. So here's the good news. We know that those people who have done backups and use backups to recover from ransomware, the majority have been able to recover the data, but not all of them. And there are some best practices out there you need to be aware of. And that's really what we need to talk about. In order to do that, I want to talk to you about UDP. UDP is our unified data protection solution. I'm going to show you a quick build of the architecture of the solution that Stacy will then demonstrate for you in the context of recovering from malware or ransomware. Our solution essentially is a disk-to-disk backup solution that protects physical and virtual environments. We do extremely well with virtual environments and physical. We cover all your traditional platforms for mid-market environments. And we can also send data off to tape. That's a very important point here, very important point, because that's part of the strategies you're going to be able to use to defeat ransomware should you be in a remediation phase where you have to recover from your backups and for some reason you have to go back to a tape backup. But it's another option, it's another layer of protection. We have built-in replication. We deliver a solution as software. We also deliver it as hardware, so you could use the UDP appliance should you want to have a solution that's got all-in-one and that you can deploy very quickly, very easily, maybe in a remote office type of environment. We can, of course, replicate data to a data center. That could be your disaster recovery partner, MSP site that does the disaster recovery for you. That data can then be shipped off to tape somewhere in a mountain. So lots of options here. The point I'm making is the recovery point server, which is the heart of the operation for ArcServe UDP, does great replication. It also deduplicates your data as it does this to make this whole process very easy, fast, and not too consuming in terms of bandwidth. Finally, it's a hybrid world out there, and a lot of the times you're going to be leveraging a cloud solution, whether it's a public cloud or a specialty cloud or maybe even our own ArcServe cloud. The point I'm making is all of these techniques and technologies are going to be very critical to how quickly you can recover from ransomware, depending on the type of attack, the spread of the infection, how many systems you're recovering, what you're trying to recover. You may be able to recover from all of these sources, all of these destinations, and that's really a very powerful thing. So with this, I would like to turn it over to Stacy Budd. I have a very hard time not calling you Mr. Simpson, but the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. As I get kind of choked up here, it must have been that donut this morning. So thank you, Christoph. When we look at UDP, right, ArcServe Unified Data Protection, and how specifically it can help us, recover from ransomware and protect us, you're always going to protect your systems with, best practices, antivirus, those kind of things, and training, hopefully, of your people. But if you're anything like, most companies out there, somebody at some time is going to click on some link or do something that they've been told not to do, but they're going to do it anyways, right? So one of our goals with UDP is to make the product easy enough not only to set up and configure, but also when you need to do a restore and you need to go in and you need to pull your data back, whether it's files, folders, or in this case, entire systems, right? So after we have those systems cleaned or whichever, now we need to restore the data back on it. Maybe I bring a blank machine back online, or maybe in the case of what I'm going to show here is we can go through and we can spin up a backup of a machine, right? If we have a high level of RPO, maybe we're doing backups every 15 minutes, 30 minutes, hour, something like that, we can just bring up that machine, bring it up as a virtual machine. People can start using it right away. We're going to capture those changes, those kind of things. What I do want to take just a moment to show you before we get into the restore, because restore is always important, but I do want to also show you if we go into one of our plans, and I'll just pick any of my plans here, but I just want to kind of show that when we go into scheduling, right, we can get very granular and set those dailies, those weeklies, those monthly backup schedules, and even more important, those custom schedules throughout the day. And we can use an infinite incremental schedule, right? So I start with a full backup. My first backup will always be a full. After that, we're going to do incremental backups, and we're going to just do incremental backups. We'll keep you at whatever retention setting that you set within the product, and we'll do that in the background, so it won't affect your machines, right? Your client machines that you're protecting. The point of doing incremental backups are they're going to be a much faster backup. So now, since I'm not scheduling full backups, I can take and I can protect them throughout the day, right? So now, well, if we look at a traditional tape backup solution, it's most likely, I don't think I've seen too many instances in my career that we were actually had somebody using, a tape backup solution more than once a day, right? So an RPO with that is typically daily, 24 hours. Now it can be, as I said, it could be hourly. I tell people even if you do it twice a day, every 12 hours, you just doubled your RPO with that. So you can look at your servers, how critical is that data on that server, and kind of go through and kind of set a best practice, a best plan for the RPO of that particular machine. RTO is going to be a whole nother story. We have several ways to go ahead and affect that. So I can go within my plan. I've already got a daily backup schedule, but I can add on top of that a custom schedule throughout the day. So I'm snapshotting. As I said, we can go down to every 15 minutes, and be very granular with our protection. We have some other methods within the product to kind of speed that backup process up as well for you, so that you can make sure you can get very quick backups of your machines. Once you have those in place, we're going to have a couple of other things that we can do, right? So we can also go in and we can add some additional tasks. So if we take a look, for instance, and now I want to follow some best practices, I want to move my data off-site as well. Maybe I don't have another site. Maybe I want to move it off to disk. We have what we call copy recovery point, which will allow me to move my backup off to a removable disk drive. Plenty of customers do this. They don't want to go to tape. They'd rather go to disk, so that, and then they take and they put it in the bank, right? That's a good example. I've got a lot of customers that do that. Same kind of functionality with tape, right? We can copy to tape, and we can move those backups that we're doing daily, weekly, monthlies, whatever, and move that off to tape as well to give me that off-site capability, as far as that goes. If they do have another location, then we can replicate the data up to that secondary location, whether it's as simple as branch offices replicating the data back to a data center, or replicating the data up to a cloud. Just choosing your source, your destination would be that remote location, and your schedule and your retention policy of all that data, right? Your daily, weekly, monthlies, whatever you want to retain there. Still, look, if you're following the kind of 3-2-1 rule, still this is only part of it. Replicating the data off-site, multiple types of media are usually recommended as well. That's where tape still comes into play some, and that's where you can go through and then on top of a replication task also take and copy the data off to tape, off to disk, removable disk, something like that, to get the occasional set off, completely off, so that you don't have to worry about if you get hit with ransomware or something like that as well. When we look at our recovery options, recovery time objective, right, what are our different capabilities within that? So the first one that I kind of want to show you is what we call instant virtual machine, where we can go through and choose a machine. I'll choose this one down here on the bottom, and we're just going to go through and create an instant VM. Now remember, I said we want to make this process seamless. We want to make it easy for you. So there's a couple of different steps in order to do this. Instant VM, you're going to go in, you're going to select like I did there, you're going to choose your backup. Now, perhaps, you've done some backups since you were infected and you didn't realize it, so that you need to go back further in time. So any of your backups that are still on disk, you would be able to choose those, select next. If your data is encrypted, right, as so many people's data is encrypted, we're going to, now I don't mean encrypted by the ransomware, I mean as part of the backup process, right? We're going to provide that encryption key and hopefully type it in correctly here. Let's try that. There we go. And then we're going to go through and we're going to choose a host that we want to spin this up on. Now, the great thing is if you go with one of the UDP appliances, we do have appliances that include Hyper-V on them. So you can actually choose, to spin up on that appliance itself if you wanted to do that. Or if you have your own hosts, like say like VMware or something like that, you could point to those, or other Hyper-V hosts, you could point to those as well. We'll select the host down here. And as you see this, it's going to be 4 steps, and I'm going to have my data available to me to pull that data back. And remember, this is only one method. I'm going to talk to you about, a couple other methods like bare metal restore and those kind of things. So we're going to go through, and on an appliance, it would default to the appliance. If you have a software deployment, you would either choose the default, or if you wanted a secondary server to do that recovery process, you could have another server kind of have that role. So the one that you're trying to do your restores from and do everything else from, you're separating the two. So you have one that's going to kind of be your, if you will, your emulation server that will emulate this out. We're going to choose a prefix. So in my case, I'm using VMware, so we're going to see it in vCenter with the prefix. We're going to give it a description in our console, just something so that we'll be able to identify it. We want to capture all those changes that are occurring. It's not very good to spin up a machine and start using it if you're not going to capture any of the changes. So we're just going to point to a folder on that recovery machine that we specified to capture all those changes that are occurring. Now we're going to specify resources, processor, memory, those kind of things. And we'll go ahead and give this one a little bit more memory. There we go. And if we need to connect an adapter to it, again, if you're bringing this machine up to start working off of it, you're definitely going to want to connect an adapter to it, right? So it'll pull all the adapter settings from the source machine, the original, the backed up machine. However, you can change these. Maybe I want to bring this machine up on a different network or something like that, so that while I'm cleaning my other infected network, I can have access to this on a separate network. So you can do that as well. You can even change the host name of the machine if you need to do that as well. You'll select Finish, go ahead and boot the machine now, and in 4 or 5 minutes, with my resources that are available in my demo environment, we'll have this machine up and running. I can log into it, and we'll be able to start using it. So that's one quick, easy way. Your recovery time objective, again, we went through 4 steps in order to get that data back, or in order to present this to the host, and then 4 or 5 minutes, I can have this machine up and running, presenting out. It may even be a little bit quicker, but we'll come back over to this. But just to kind of see that is the process. We try to keep it simple, and we try to make sure that the process is quick. And then once this is done, let's say I had a virtual environment and I wanted to make this a permanent machine, I could use tools within VMware, within Hyper-V, to make this a permanent machine as well. Of course, moving all those changes, everything over with it. Or if it's not a permanent machine, it's not a virtual machine, then I want to restore it to physical. There's methods in there where I can back this up after the changes have occurred, and then do my bare metal restore back out to dissimilar hardware if I need to do that as well. So several restore options there as far as that goes. Now we do have a couple others. That utilized emulation, right? So within my backup plans, what I could do instead of that is I could go through and do what we call virtual standby. And what virtual standby allows you to do is there's no emulation. What it does is it takes, and after you create a backup, it takes and converts that backup into a virtual machine, a standby machine, ready to turn on, ready to take the load of that. So there would be no configuration, there would be no 4 steps that I went through. We would just choose a plan that has virtual standby included, and we would select the machine and we would go in and we'd say standby VM. I could even go into, for instance, vCenter or Virtual Machine Manager and boot up the machine from there if I wanted to do that as well. So the advantage to something like Virtual Standby is it can be automated. It has detection built into it, so it's monitoring the source machine to see if it goes offline, and it can automatically bring up that machine, that standby machine if it needs to be done. So you can skip all that process that I just showed you with Instant Virtual Machine. The difference here with Virtual Standby is I'm going to dedicate some storage in order to have that standby machine. Instant VM, I don't need to do that, right? So Instant VM, I get the ability to be a little bit more flexible. And even if I have Virtual Standby, what happens if you're running Virtual Standby, you get hit with crypto, you run a backup, and then you turn around and your Virtual Standby is corrupted as well? That's not a very good solution. That's why Instant VM is still there, to give you more flexibility to come from backups from further back and be able to do that as well. Now we're talking here about full system kind of restore and protection. Of course, with our product, we're going to give you the capabilities to do, individual, file level, folder level restores, database level restores, things like that as well. You'll be able to do, right? But typically, when you're hit with something like crypto, you're concerned about restoring the machine, and as far as that goes, there's always best practices involved. My favorite saying is never trust a backup, always verify, verify, verify. So you should always make sure part of your processes you're doing verification, so that when you go to failover, what does that do, right? You're also you're going to know that the process that's in place, you're going to know that the data is good and secure. There's not going to be any problems restoring that data. And then also you should always have if you will, a disaster recovery plan in place. What are the steps? What do you do in order to do that? What's the expected time? So you test all this, right? So you would go through and run an instant VM like I just did. Maybe you don't connect it to a network, but you test it, you run it, so you know what your expected time can be. So now when you go through and you talk to your management and things like that, you know what to present to them. And what I really like to say is, really, when we talk to management, not all companies out there have DR plans in place. They don't, and sometimes it's a conversation that's a little bit difficult to really to get going. You would think in today's day and age that it would be a hot topic, but some people, their method of protection is I'll ignore it until it happens, right, and then I'll worry about it. So I mean, you can push the subject. You can talk to them. This is what the product does. This is how we can do it. What do you need your recovery times to be? What do you need your recovery points to be? Really, this is where it's going to be key. And turn around, and what my point is if management tells me they want a recovery time of 3 hours, let's try to make it an hour and a half, because everybody knows that when you go through and you have that conversation and they're talking about it and everything's cool, calm, that they're under no pressure, right? When they get hit with ransomware or some type of disaster, they're going to be knocking on the IT administrator's door. How long before we get everything back up? They're not going to worry about that 6 hours or 3 hours. They're going to be constantly picking up the phone. How quickly can we get this back up? It's costing us money or something like that. So my advice is take whatever's recommended and let's try to half it, right? So we can be, look here, and then you're the hero, right? And so that's my recommendation on top of there. If we go back over to this other server, look, you'll see that it is logged in. It's up and running. I can go through and I can log into this box now, and I could go through and I could start utilizing whatever's on here, right? So if I needed to go through and access databases, files, applications, things like that, I could definitely do that. So even with my long-winded kind of speech there and everything, you know, I think that that was a fairly quick failover to get that machine up and running. So I hope that that shows you one method, you know, instant virtual machine that can really address, you know, and can be used to, you know, with your RPO, your frequent backups, to kind of help you recover quickly from ransomware. And I think with that, you know, we'll hand it back over to Christoph. Let me just get back over to our slides here.
Thank you very much. Good. So there have been a few questions. We'll cover them at the end of the best practices section here. I have a couple of customer stories I want to cover here, and also make a couple of comments and remarks on the basis of some of the questions we've received. So first of all, I think somebody made a very good point around the fact that obviously in the sequence of events, if you're hit by ransomware, you want to make sure you stop the infection first, because otherwise you're going to perpetuate the same problem over and over again. You could recover a machine and then it gets hit again by some other network share or some other part of the network. So first step is obviously to stop the infection. Second step is to assess the damage. What do you need to, what is locked up, what is the problem, what are the problems, and what do I need to recover? And then you can choose based on what you've seen here at a very high level how to proceed, whether you're going to go with an instant VM, a virtual standby, maybe you use a backup from 2-3 hours ago because it's actually been spreading for 2 hours. You don't really know until you do the work up front. The diagnosis part is going to be very important for you to get this taken care of. So now let me talk to you about one of our customers. It's a publishing business somewhere in the world. We keep this information confidential for obvious reasons, and we do thank our customer who gave us the information. So this customer has a few hundred users at this publishing business. And essentially what happened is, one, despite their efforts in terms of educating people and everything else that they do to protect their network, the corruption happened to have spread on from a zip file, photos.zip or pictures.zip, one of those, which came from a spoofed email address that looked like a friendly address. So essentially you got another happy end user that clicked on a zip file from the outside world, and that of course spread on this person's machine. But here's the thing, that's another question that came up, or remark that came up. Guess what happened? The file that was in there was a BART type of virus. Oops, that's a funny one. Okay, we get 10 for humor here. 10 out of 10. So BART infected the environment, and if you look at what it did, it actually went to the next phase of it was that it spread to a share, a couple of actually NAS devices, if I'm not mistaken. So that created quite a bit of problem here, and they also had some point of sale activity in that business that got affected. So not a good time, not a good day. Luckily, the customer had a snapshot. This infection happened at 7 a.m. snapshot. The infection happened, it was a Friday, I believe, a few hours later. So in essence, while some of the environment was affected, there was a nearline copy not too far that could be recovered with ArcServe UDP, and after the infection was contained. So here the data loss or the interruption was limited. RPO and RTO were well within parameters that were acceptable for the business. As a matter of fact, if we go to the next component here of the slide, the result was that he got a letter of recommendation from the CEO. However, note the 28 hours it took to determine the source, repair, reverse the damage, etc. Remember that survey I showed you earlier from the UK, 300 businesses, they were saying on average 33 hours. So you can see how this customer here did a little better, but 28 hours, that's a long time. So obviously the first source or the first line of defense is always going to be to have great antivirus, great technology to detect and mitigate the attacks, warn you, etc., and remediate those before they even spread. But it's likely not always going to work. And that's when you have to go through these steps that I just described, and that's when we can come in and help you get back on your feet with data that's not corrupted, that will not perpetuate the problem, and that will allow you to resume business operations. Another example for you comes from not very surprisingly, a medical type or healthcare type of facility, and I will again not mention where. I would just say that this is a North American example, and this specific customer was hit with multiple attacks, which is something that this type of industry has been targeted, and not really a surprise, but multiple successive attacks that were clearly creating a lot of problems in the industry, a lot of bad press, and there's no number you can put on that, by the way. So in order to avoid essentially the operational impacts, to the community they serve, remember this is medical and healthcare, they really have to be very, very careful, and they really have very, very stringent SLAs, right? If some of the systems are unavailable, we're talking about people here not being able to receive care or treatment. So it's a big deal. Next one. Good. So I talked about negative publicity, and let's go to number 4. So the story here is that actually it turns out that he was very successful for the first 4 attacks, but the 5th one was extremely aggressive, and what it did, it was a pretty sophisticated one that took over some of the administration accounts, which then allowed the encryption ransomware to go attack dozens of servers. Okay, so if you think you're having a bad day, think about this poor administrator's day. It was awful, and that's a pretty sophisticated way to do it. And that's why we're talking best practices about protecting, obviously, your administration accounts, but also more importantly, you want to protect your backup environment as well. You don't want it to fall prey to that. So luckily with ArcServe UDP, customer was able to recover all the servers. Okay, they would have been paying a lot of money to recover. They paid nothing, and we're talking thousands of dollars. I don't have an exact number, but given what we've seen in that industry, this was a while back, but still the numbers were typically pretty high because that industry is considered, and given the criticality of it, it's considered that it's a great target to get a lot of money out of them. It's unfortunate, but that's exactly what it is. It's extortion, and luckily we saved our customer money. I haven't worked out the ROI for this customer, but I'm sure they made their investment in UDP back with how we saved their data here and saved them from this attack. So what's interesting here is that the traditional type of files seem to have been the focus of the attacks here, the PDF, the docs, your kind of office environment, but it was really the admin account that was hacked, literally. So in terms of best practices, of course you want to protect the source machine. There's no question about that. Great technologies exist to protect you against viruses, but sometimes they're not updated quickly enough, and that could cause a situation where a new strain literally hits that source machine. Typically, I'm showing here a laptop, but or workstation. That's really not surprisingly, surprising. It's typically what gets attacked: end users, workstations, and that's how it spreads. So even if you have great virus protection, if it's not updated quickly enough, something may go through. Additional best practices include, thank you, of course, regular backups. So 2 things. The regular backups, I think you got a very good idea with the demonstration from Stacy, which was the fact that you can really define the granularity and the recovery point objectives you want for the nodes you're protecting. If it's a workstation that has some important data, you probably want to back it up every couple of hours, 3 hours. If it doesn't have that much critical data, you can maybe just do a backup, once or twice a day. If it's a production server, a critical application, transactional, typically, you're going to want to have that lowest possible RPO. And by the way, in our solution, we even have some continuous data protection capabilities that can give you the ability to rewind, literally go back in time and protect everything almost with zero RPO. We're talking a few seconds. So lots of options exist. The other best practice is obviously multiple copies in multiple places and on multiple media. Even you know, the old methods here apply, and they do work. They do work. Should something awful happen, and should you lose maybe even your backup server, you could potentially, if you do this right, you can get your backup server back or fail over to one of the replicated environments, which is something you can easily do with UDP, or you can get back on your feet, even over distance. So again, think about having multiple copies, multiple media, multiple versions. I think with continuous data protection or regular snapshots, you really get this ability to be granular. So the final thought on this is also to have a solution that includes virtual standby, which you saw, because really this is something that gives you the ability to optimize your RPO by having that system ready with the last backup ready to go. Now, obviously, there are some caveats, as depending on what and when and how you were attacked, but the fact that you have this capability can really, really change the nature of the response you provide and how successful you are. So leverage virtual standby or instant VM depending on the situation. So my conclusion is it's great to protect the source machines, obviously, but think about protecting the protector, which is the backup data. So best practices apply here for administration. You don't want to, you want to make sure you have, you lock up the administration accounts, that you really control and protect those backup servers. In some cases, they can get encrypted. But more importantly, what's nice about our solution is that you can replicate data to multiple sources. You can replicate data to the offsite to the cloud. You can literally replicate the backup server itself, all of its data onto tape or another server. You have many, or disks, so you have many options to protect the protector here. And obviously having these regular recovery points that are offline and cannot be accessed is really something that you want to consider as part of your strategy. So it goes well beyond just having a great backup schedule. It really goes back to having great protection as a first line of defense, education of end users so they don't click on those .zip files or those infected files, the ability to be very smart and granular about your recovery depending on the criticality of the systems you're protecting, and then protecting the backup environment itself by leveraging multiple sources and destinations. So I will now, I think, switch to the questions part of the webcast here. And actually, I have to tell you, Stacy, I have one question for you, which comes from Jim, and it's a very important question that I think you totally failed to mention, and everybody has a problem with it. Okay. Stacy, what's your favorite donut?
I like the plain, simple glazed donut. Can't beat that. No sprinkles, no nothing like that.
Excellent. I would tend to agree. We will not mention brands, but I'm sure we can get that offline. All right. So I mentioned a couple of my coverage of best practices or remarks that were made. So a couple of questions. Maybe you can take this one, Stacy. Does ransomware only come in via email or mail attachments?
So there is
Dave.
multiple, yeah, there are multiple ways that ransomware can get onto a network, right? The most common is, of course, email attachments and things like that. But there could be a DNS redirection. You may go to, browse to a website that you go to all the time, and, what you don't know is the ads on the side have been redirected. So you click on an interesting article or something like that, and again, it has nothing to do with that particular whatever website it is. It's just that there's been a DNS redirection. So that's one way to do it. And it's with ads and things like that. It's another common way to get things into the network. And then probably perhaps the most scary way for anything to ever get into the network is from the inside. Right? Somebody brings something in, sometimes malicious, sometimes not malicious. Maybe somebody brings in I kind of hate to admit this, but my wife, she works for a certain medical company, and she will bring in her MP3 player and plug it into her laptop so she can listen to music during the day. And it makes me cringe because that's one way, right, that now that's usually not ever connected to a network or anything like that, but still it's a way that, something from the outside that could be infected, it gets on the inside and things like that as well. So you have to be very cognizant of your users and your users' practices. Like I said, it could be malicious, it could be non-malicious, and sometimes people are just like, hey, look at this funny email I got, let me click on it and just see what it does. I mean, it happens, right? So even though you tell people not to do it, people still do it. So there's a number of ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we have a vote for chocolate glazed, actually.
Okay.
And I would not comment further on that. I would not necessarily agree with that. Anyway, so very good answer. There was a very good question that I'll just take this one. Replication and deduplication applications require some form of database to be used for recovery. So what happens if the appliance fails or is damaged? So yeah, in our case, it's the recovery point server. A very good point from Eli here. And what it is what we do is, by virtue of doing global source size deduplication, we keep essentially blocks of data that are unique in our database. We understand what's on each machine, and we can literally reconstruct or rebuild any system, including what we call bare metal restore, which is recovering the system from scratch, even to the similar hardware type of scenario. So this being said, if you remember from the earlier slide where you see the recovery point server being connected to another server or another appliance, or an appliance connected to another server, it doesn't matter which configuration as long as it's UDP. By definition, you're copying that database that has all of the intelligence to rebuild that server, but also to rebuild any other system that has been backed up by UDP. So that's how we do it. We also have some capabilities to copy data off to tape. We have capabilities to cut a copy of the data store to disk, a portable NAS device, for example, that you can actually use to seed another server. Should you lose, for example, a whole facility, then you use your disaster recovery center for a while, and then you can bring the data back literally by bringing UDP back and recovering from there locally. So many permutations, many combinations. What else? Let me see. We have a bunch of questions here. We do not support virtual standby for Unix. We focus on Windows and Linux platforms. Okay, there's a question that's associated here with.
However, Christoph, I think that we could add that we do have high availability for Unix.
Correct, that's true. Right. We have an agent for Unix for the high availability module. Right. So it's not virtual standby, actually. It's even more granular than that. It's continuous data protection. So that gives you a true RPO of close to 0 in that case. But you have to have the high availability module and that agent. Okay, so here's an interesting one for you, Stacy. Not knowing the settings in a standby VM how does the automatic standby work in terms of normal operations? For example, taking servers down on purpose, server restarts, etc. Would you have to disable it manually, or is there a certain time offline it automatically boots?
So I think you're talking about like the virtual standby, and I said how it can automatically take that role. So there's a couple of pieces within there. Number one, you can easily write on the machine in our console, right-click and pause the monitoring, right? So the failover doesn't happen, right, while you're doing any maintenance or anything like that on there. Now that doesn't pause the creation of a virtual standby. So I could still be backing up my machine, doing whatever, and then a new virtual standby machine created as far as that goes. So that would be the first step to that, right? To be able to do that. You can easily pause, restart. You can pause the creation of virtual standbys. So if, for instance, you suspect something may be going on, you want to stick with the current virtual standby machine. You're still going to back up your machines, but you don't want to create new standby machines until you're confident that nothing is going on. You can definitely do that. Now, I would say go ahead and leverage Instant VM in that case instead. And then the last kind of answer or piece to your question there was, more in configuration. As you as you configure virtual standby, you will configure the resources for that machine, but also once that machine's up and created in either Hyper-V or VMware, you would be able to go in and edit that machine up there. It's a regular virtual machine created, so you could edit it like you would edit any offline machine and settings and all those if you wanted to do that. And you can also go in and set a manual failover instead of an automatic failover. So we have several methods there on the way to do that failover. So you could right-click on the machine and say standby. You could have that be automated. You could go into vCenter or to Virtual Machine Manager and start them up through there as well if you wanted to. Great question.
Perfect, very comprehensive answer. Well, I find that's pretty much all the time we have for questions. We try to keep these to 45 minutes or so, and we're a little over that. So thank you, everybody, for your time. Mary, I'd like to, and Stacy, for your answers. I'd like to turn it back to you, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you, Christophe and Stacy, for that great presentation. This afternoon, I'll be sending out a recording to the email addresses you guys used when you registered, so keep an eye out for that. If any of you have additional questions or you'd like to set up a more in-depth demo, please reach out to us at arcserve.com. The phone number is listed right on the top of the website. You can start a chat, download a trial, all of that right there. So please do that. And Kim will be sending out a video recording of this webcast later today to answer your question that just came in. So thank you, everyone, for spending this time with us, and have a great rest of your day.